Hello friends, welcome. In today's instructional video, I will be going over the pose Chaturanga Dandasana, which is four-limb staff pose, also known as a low plank position. This is a pose that I think is kind of dreaded by a lot of people, myself included at times. It's such a challenging and strong pose. However, it's really worth it to build up towards this pose because it has so many benefits. It strengthens the upper body and the core, and it prepares you for many other poses. With that said, if you try this video and you're like, Chaturanga just isn't meant for me right now until I build a little more strength, if you have a wrist or shoulder injury, it might not be for you at all, then there are so many other options. You might say this pose is not meant for me ever in my life, and that's totally okay too. I do recommend watching my instructional video on plank pose first because Chaturanga pretty much is plank, but lowering halfway. And there are many ways to come through a Vinyasa that don't include Chaturanga. So if you're interested in that, I have a video on what does it mean to come through your Vinyasa and different ways to do that without Chaturanga. But we're here for this pose, so let's get started. Have two blocks, you will need them. Place them at the top of your mat on the highest height, and then come towards the back of your mat. Bring your big toes to touch, separate your knees just to about shoulder width apart so that you can come into an extended child's pose with your ribs resting over your thighs. Crawl your arms out in front of you and relax your head for a moment. Allow the eyes to soften or close as you take a few breaths here in and out of the nose. Every exhale, feel the hips and the pelvis melt back towards the heels. And every inhale, start to inch your hands a little bit further forward. So use your exhales to feel the hips and pelvis ground down towards the heels. Inhale, can you inch your hands a little further forward? Start to crawl your hands so far forward that your forearms and elbows lift off the mat. And now take a peek up at your hands. Make sure they're shoulder width apart. Wrist creases parallel to the top edge of your mat. And then relax your head again. Now in your child's pose, ground through your inner hand, thumb and index finger. Keep those parts of your hand down as you spin your inner arms and shoulders up towards the ceiling and squeeze your outer upper arms down and in. Notice if your thumb and index finger just lifted off the floor. Can you find those arm actions? Wrap the outer upper arms, the triceps down, and spin the inner arms up, but also press into thumb and index finger. Keeping this distance between your hands and knees, inhale, lift your hips high off your heels. Separate your feet to hip bone apart, tuck your toes under. Come into downward facing dog. Relax the head and neck, the eyes, the jaw. Same arm and hand actions, press into the inner hand, thumb and index finger. Keep that rooted as you spin the inner arms forward and squeeze your outer upper arms back and in. If you need to bend the knees in down dog, of course, bend your knees. And now let's wake up the shoulders a little bit. Inhale, rock forward, come to a plank pose. Catch your hip shoulder height. Always option to do plank with knees down. Take another breath in. Exhale, downward facing dog. If you're practicing plank with your knees down, you can simply shift your hips back towards your heels. We're going to do this a few times. So from plank or low plank, inhale, down dog. Inhale, rock forward to your plank. Exhale, go back. Two more times. Inhale, rock forward. Keep the tone in the belly. Reach your heart forward. Exhale, hips back. One more time. Inhale, rock forward. And exhale back. Take a deep breath in. Exhale, drop to your knees and come to a tabletop position on hands and knees. Stack your shoulders over your wrists. Stack your hips over your knees. As you inhale, arch your spine as if you're coming into cow pose, a position of extension, opening the front body. You're in a back bend. Feel how your shoulder blades are pressing into your chest. That's broadening your collarbones. That's a nice thing. We all need more of that. Also feel how your pelvis is rocking forward in an anterior tilt. There's a big arch at the low back and very little tone in the belly. And now let's do the opposite. As you exhale, round your spine. And pause. Now feel your shoulder blades just spread away from each other. Feel that your pelvis is rocking backwards, meaning your pubic bone just got closer to your navel. Your tailbone is almost tucking under. That creates a lift in the low belly. Now, I would like you to keep this position of the lower body, pelvis rocking backwards, but then start to reach your chest forward. So can you broaden across the collarbones, but keep the tone in the low belly? Walk your knees about an inch closer to your hands. So now your shoulders are about an inch past your wrist. Push the floor away from you. Reach your chest forward, but lift the pubic bone up towards the navel. Take one more breath. And now exhale, step your feet back. Plug into the ground with your big toe mounds, plank pose. You should be in a plank with your shoulders slightly past the wrist, but plugging into the ground with the big toe mounds. One more breath in. Exhale, drop to your knees. Sit back on your shins and give your wrist a little break. Bring the backs of your hands together. So now we're going to try some yogi push-ups, as I call them, with the blocks. Have your blocks in front of you, shoulder width apart, highest height. If you don't have blocks, don't worry, you can just kind of eye it. So Chaturanga is so hard because you go from a plank position where you have a whole arm to push the ground away from you, to bending your elbows to about a 90-degree angle. And then you only have half an arm to push the floor away from you. So I'll show you from the side. Let's do this together. You can just be seated or stand up if it's more comfortable. Reach your arms forward, arms shoulder width apart. Turn your fingers up towards the ceiling. Take an inhale. And now exhale, bend your elbows. Slide your elbows by your low ribs. So now can you feel that elbows are right under the shoulders and your elbows are over, or elbows are in line with shoulders, elbows over the wrist. This is a 90-degree angle. This is what we're looking for in Chaturanga. Now what we're looking not to do is let the shoulders collapse. We really want to think shoulders back, and we do that by pulling the chest forward. So one reason why Chaturanga is so difficult is because we have to do two things at the same time. We have to pull our chest forward. That's so that we don't collapse into the shoulders, which is really not a nice thing for the shoulders. Over time, it can lead to injury, such as a rotator cuff injury. But what happens is when we pull the chest forward, our rib cage flares out, right? I like to do it from shins to show you. I pull my chest forward, but now my rib cage is flaring out. My pelvis rocks forward. There's this big anterior tilt, and now I'm putting all the pressure on the low back. So, can you do both? Can you reach your chest forward, but then lift the pubic bone up towards the navel? And it's easier when there's no weight on you, but now we're going to do it with some weight in the upper arms. Bring your hands about an inch behind your blocks, shoulder width apart, wrist creases parallel to the top of your mat. Shoulders over the wrist, walk your knees back about 2 inches. In this low plank, reach your chest forward. So you're in almost this diagonal from the crown of your head to your knees. Now take your pelvis and rock it backwards. If that feels elusive, round your spine like cat pose. That's going to cause the pelvis to rock backwards to create the tone in the belly that we want, the rib cage lifting away from the floor. But now can you also press into the mat with your fingertips, almost like you're a cat. Claw the mat with your fingers and now reach your chest forward. Take an inhale. As you exhale, bend your elbows and try to tap the blocks with your shoulders. That's about a 90-degree angle. Inhale, press back up. Let's do it again. Exhale, bend and lower. Inhale, press back up. How about one more time for good measure? Exhale, lower. Pull the chest forward. Keep the belly in. Inhale, press up. Exhale, sit back. Give your wrists a break. I know it's a lot on the wrists. Your wrists will get stronger and used to this over time. But again, if you ever get too tired, we don't need to do Chaturanga. So now we're going to come into a full plank pose with our fingers behind the blocks and practice Chaturanga. If you'd like to do this one with your knees up, feel free to do so. If not, keep the knees down. Bring your hands about an inch behind the blocks, shoulder width apart, wrist creases parallel to the top of the mat. I know I'm a broken record, but your building blocks are working from the ground up. Now either knees move back, stay in your low plank, or step your feet back, come to a high plank. However, make sure you're plugging into the ground with your big toe mounts, not your tippy toes, because then you can't use your legs. Walk your feet in slightly so your shoulders are an inch past the wrist. Both are important. Shoulders slightly past the wrist, plugging into the ground with the big toe mounts. Take a breath in. Exhale, reach your chest forward as you push the heels back. Try to tap the blocks. And then inhale, press up. Drop to your knees and sit back. So the reason why we have to adjust our plank so it's not just a classical plank, it's a plank with the shoulders an inch past the wrist. And that's in order to get the elbows to stack over the wrists, but also to be plugging into the ground with the big toe mounts. Oftentimes I see people practice Chaturanga like this. They come to a plank, and then rather than walking their feet in so their shoulders are past the wrist, all they do is this. Now I'm on my tippy toes, which is no fun because I can't use my legs at all. All the work is in my upper body now. And then they lower. They have to shift forward to get elbows over wrist. That is so much more work than coming to plank, adjusting your feet, and then I can plug into the ground with the big toe mounts, press the thighs up as I drop the tailbone, pull the chest forward and lower. So that is our Chaturanga with knees up. So either from plank, you have to walk your feet in, then lower halfway, or if you're hopping from a forward fold to Chaturanga, which I talk more about in my Coming Through Your Vinyasa tutorial, you'll really have to have your hands beside your feet, not in front of them. When you step back with your hands beside your feet, meaning fingers in line with toes, you usually land in a plank with your shoulders slightly past the wrist, but plugging into the ground with the big toe mounts. So let's do one more Chaturanga together. Move your blocks to the side if you would like to practice with no blocks. If you find it helpful, keep your blocks at the top of your mat. Roll out your wrist a little bit. Give yourself a pep talk. I know it's a strong pose. And then come to a tabletop. So from your tabletop, let's find the actions of Chaturanga before we even do Chaturanga. Reach your chest forward by using your fingertips. Do that as you lift the pubic bone up towards the navel. So pelvis is in a very slight posterior tilt. Pelvis can be neutral, but if you watch my planked instructional video, I do teach more of a posterior tilt to keep the tone in the belly. Now either come to a low plank, knees move back, or step your feet back, come to plank. In your plank, step your feet in so your shoulders are an inch past your wrist. Plug into the ground with your big toe mounts. Take a full breath in, reach your heart forward as you push the heels back. Exhale, lower halfway, catch yourself elbow height, keep the tone in the belly. Inhale, press up plank. Drop to your knees, sit back on your heels. Bring the backs of your hands together. Relax the elbows, the shoulders, and take a few breaths here. So I encourage you to practice Chaturanga several times. When I first started doing yoga, I would film myself to see what my Chaturanga looked like because we don't want to practice this pose incorrectly. If you start to go to take the flow classes, we take Vinyasas quite often, which include Chaturanga. When Chaturanga is done incorrectly, that's when we can start to create injuries in the body. It's usually those repetitive movements that create injuries, not doing something just one time. And this is a pose we do often in flow classes. With that said, if you're like, not for me right now, work on building the strength by doing plank poses and baby cobras to build the strength in the upper back. And then maybe one day you come back to this pose because it is great to prepare you for other poses. So let me know how this goes for you and enjoy your Chaturanga. Namaste.